Hello, my fellow explorer. You have accessed Renegade Files, your underground connection to paranormal events, unsolved mysteries, and deep cultural analysis. I'm your host, Lex Gordon, reaching across the airwaves from the Jungle Villa outpost deep in the uncharted tropics. This is Renegade Files episode 115, That's No Moon, the Hollow and Spaceship Moon Theories. This week we turn our attention upward. For as long as humanity has recorded its own history, the moon has occupied a place of permanence in the sky. It governs tides, it marks time and anchors mythology. Civilizations have written poetry about it, navigated by it, worshipped beneath it, and studied it through telescopes with disciplined curiosity. Yet, the scientific narrative grew into another current that developed quietly in the background. A line of inquiry that did not begin with fantasy but with observation. A suggestion that what orbits our planet may not be entirely natural. A proposal that the moon could be hollow, or artificial, or engineered. This episode, we will examine these theories carefully, tracing where the ideas originated, how they evolved, and why they continue to circulate decades after their first appearances. The modern articulation of the hollow moon is that Earth's satellite might be an artificial construct, possibly placed in orbit by an advanced civilization long before recorded history. From Soviet hypotheses to scientific speculation to outright science fiction, an expanding interest in the moon as artificial became its own hidden history. Tie this into a larger narrative of government secrecy and extraterrestrial presence, and you get authors like Jim Marrs, Christopher Knight, and David Icke engaging the subject. On this episode, we move through this material in chronological order, examining each major contribution and the context surrounding it. We look at the scientific data, historical moments, cultural climates, and implications that have fostered the ideas. And whether we look at these ideas as speculative mythology, suppressed knowledge, or intellectual curiosity, their presence is compelling. By the end of this exploration, you might find yourself looking upward with a slightly different perspective of the human tendency to reimagine the cosmos. Not because a conclusion has been handed to you, but because the historical pathway of these ideas reveals how expansive the questions really are. So settle in. We begin in the ancient world, when we first looked up and wondered. This is episode 115. That's No Moon. Part 1. The Old School. In the ancient world, the moon was animated, personified, revered, or even feared. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians worshipped Nana, a lunar deity associated with wisdom and the measurement of time. In Greece, Selene crossed the heavens in a radiant chariot. In Rome, lunar cycles were woven into ritual calendars and cosmological systems that structured the entire civilization. Among the Aztecs, the moon was bound to mythic conflict. In one creation account, the gods gathered at Teotihuacan to bring light into the cosmos. Nanahuatzin leapt into the fire and became the sun. Tecuzatcatl followed and became the moon. Through his brightness, the world was illuminated at night. And when a rabbit arrived on the scene, it leapt into the sky to land on the moon's face. The dark markings visible from Earth were explained through these kinds of stories. Surface features became the narrative. Many Native American traditions also encoded the moon into their cosmology. In certain plains and woodland accounts, the moon watches over the earth as a guardian, or a regulator of natural rhythms. Some tribes describe the moon as a dwelling place inhabited by spirits or ancestral beings. In an article entitled Origins of the Moon-Eyed People from Mythology Worldwide, posted on January 11, 2025, we read that the moon-eyed people were created as guardians of the night, possessing the ability to see in the darkness and navigate the hidden paths of the nighttime world. The most distinctive feature of the Native American moon-eyed people was their eyes, described as emanating an ethereal glow, allowing them to pierce through the darkness and observe unseen realms. The moon-eyed people are often depicted as tall and slender, with long flowing hair and an otherworldly aura. They embody the connection between the physical and the spiritual world, serving as intermediaries between humans and the spirit realm. Their eyes, which illuminate the darkness, symbolize wisdom, foresight, and the ability to perceive hidden truth. Additionally, they are associated with the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, as the moon in many Native American cultures is seen as a symbol of renewal and change. Parallel to lunar mythology, hollow world concepts emerged in various cultures. Greek philosophers like Pythagoras speculated about cosmic harmony and geometric perfection in the heavens. Later, in early Europe, thinkers like Edmund Halley suggested that the Earth itself might contain concentric inner spheres. The hollow Earth hypothesis gained traction in the 17th and 18th centuries, not as fiction, but as speculative natural philosophy. If the Earth could be structured in layers with internal cavities, then maybe other celestial bodies possessed similar features. These ideas meant that all celestial objects were not necessarily solid or lifeless spheres. They could contain realms, beings, or even mechanisms hidden beneath the surface view. This conceptual openness persisted long before rockets ever left the ground. With the innovation of the telescope in the early 17th century, the moon shifted from mythic symbol to observable terrain. Galileo's sketches revealed mountains and craters. The surface appeared irregular with textured features. In the 19th century, density estimates started to raise quiet questions. The moon, given its size and orbit and speed, appeared less dense than Earth. Some scientists attributed this to differences in composition, while other explanations for the moon's low density started to emerge. At the same time, fiction dug into subterranean and artificial worlds with enthusiasm. In 1864, Jules Verne published From the Earth to the Moon, envisioning a projectile journey to the lunar surface. Though primarily concerned with travel, Verne's work framed the moon as a destination capable of holding secrets. Later, H.G. Wells' The First Men in the Moon introduced the Selenites, an intelligent species inhabiting a vast underground lunar society. Wells imagined a structured interior civilization hidden beneath the moon's surface. These stories filled the cultural imagination with images of hollow or inhabited moon. Readers absorbed the possibility that a planetary object might conceal complexity beneath its exterior. By the early 20th century, speculative astronomy and imaginative literature began to reflect each other. Pulp magazines and serialized science fiction circulated ideas about artificial satellites, lost civilizations, and ancient engineers. Writers proposed that advanced beings could reshape worlds or even reposition them. While mainstream science pursued gravitational equations and spectroscopic analysis, popular culture experimented with cosmic architecture. It's important to also recognize the historical context that these narratives developed within. The Industrial Revolution had changed both landscapes and ways of living. Engineers built bridges, canals, and skyscrapers that earlier generations would have considered impossible. As technological ambition expanded, so did the scale of imagined construction. If humans could carve mountains and span rivers, perhaps an advanced civilization could populate the moon. This new way of looking at things automatically drew ideas from ancient myths. And when rockets broke through the atmosphere and went into the earliest orbits, the space age was met with a public primed for more. Before we reach the Cold War hypothesis and the next stage of the moon theories, we should appreciate how long the groundwork had been forming. Humanity has rarely accepted the moon as just some simple object. It has been a deity, a realm, a calendar, a mirror, a goddess, a destination, and a stage for speculative life. The modern hollow moon narrative did not emerge in isolation. It rose from centuries of myth, philosophical inquiry, and imaginative projection. Understanding these roots allows us to see how a scientific anomaly, when it did appear in the 20th century, could attach itself to a much older habit of cosmic reinterpretation. From the ancient world's personified moon to early hollow world speculation and the rise of science fiction's subterranean civilizations, the idea that something more might lie beneath the surface of the moon has been growing for generations. In the next chapter of this exploration, the theory takes on a distinctly modern shape, with geopolitics, space exploration, and a scientific paper that would ignite decades of debate. If you like Renegade Files and want to help keep this independent show alive, join the Renegade Files agency on Patreon and unlock exclusive agent-only bonus episodes, the Dark Intel Files, and secret dispatches. If you believe in digging deeper and keeping truth alive, then join me at patreon.com/renegadefiles. There's a link in the show notes. It's free for a week, and become an agent today. Thank you if you're already an RFA agent. You make this show possible. Part 2. The Cold War Catalyst. By the middle of the 20th century, speculation about the moon entered a new phase. Telescopes were no longer the primary instruments of inquiry. Rockets, probes, and seismographs replaced them. The conversations shifted from mythology and fiction to telemetry and data. In July of 1969, only months before Apollo was said to have landed on the lunar surface, a brief article appeared in the Soviet journal Sputnik. The authors were Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov. Both were associated with the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Their paper carried a provocative title that translated into English as, "Is the Moon the Creation of Alien Intelligence?" The article was organized as speculative scientific reasoning. Vasin and Sherbakov argued that certain characteristics of the moon were difficult to reconcile with standard models of natural formation. They focused on its size relative to Earth, its unusual, perfectly circular orbit, and its tidal locking, which results in one moon hemisphere perpetually facing our planet. They also examined density. Compared to Earth, the moon possesses a much lower average density. The Soviet researchers proposed that the moon might contain an internal cavity or a layered shell structure. In their hypothesis, an advanced civilization could have hollowed out a natural body and installed machinery or habitation within, using the remaining outer crust as a protective shield. This proposal was presented during a period of intense geopolitical competition. The United States and the Soviet Union were engaged in a space race that carried both technological ambition and ideological symbolism. Each lunar mission was interpreted through the lens of national prestige. In that environment, any unconventional interpretation of lunar data carried additional weight. The Sputnik article did not claim definitive proof, it just posed a possibility. But the mere suggestion that Earth's satellite might be artificial ignited curiosity well beyond the Soviet Union. Western media outlets summarized the hypothesis. Science writers debated it. Within a few years, the idea migrated into alternative research circles. Around the same time, lunar seismic experiments began producing results that would later become central to the hollow moon narrative. On November 20, 1969, the Apollo 12 mission jettisoned its lunar module ascent stage, which struck the moon's surface with significant force. In other words, it crashed. Instruments recorded oscillations that persisted longer than some observers expected. Much longer. Later missions produced similar data. In technical reports, NASA scientists described reverberations that continued for extended periods, sometimes for over an hour. Within the scientific community, these findings were interpreted in terms of lunar geology. The moon lacks substantial water and has a fractured, dry crust. Seismic energy can travel differently through such material when compared to the Earth's interior or exterior. One scientist involved said that when the module struck the moon, that the moon, quote, rang like a bell for over an hour. This expression originated in discussions among researchers attempting to describe the quality of the recorded signals. In alternative literature, that metaphor evolved into a literal suggestion that the moon is hollow like a bell. This period marked the convergence of two forces. First, a formal scientific article had entered the possibility of artificial origin. Second, seismic data offered imagery that could be interpreted dramatically. Together, they formed the nucleus of the modern hollow moon hypothesis. Once again, these developments can't be separated from their cultural climate. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, public trust in official institutions was eroding, to say the least. The Vietnam War, political assassinations, and intelligence scandals fostered skepticism toward government and news narratives. At the same time, space exploration expanded humanity's physical reach beyond the Earth for the first time in history. All of a sudden, the moon seemed both familiar and alien. In such an atmosphere, unconventional explanations found receptive audiences. Vashin and Sherbakov's article became a reference point. Later authors cited it as foundational. Some treated it as evidence that respected scientists had already confirmed that the moon was artificial in design. Others viewed it as a thought experiment that had been prematurely dismissed. What began as speculative inquiry in a Soviet publication evolved into a cornerstone of the Spaceship moon narrative. The Cold War provided the stage, seismic instrumentation provided the sound. From this point forward, the theory would move from academic journals and into popular presses, carried by writers who expanded its scope and sharpened its claims. In the next phase of this exploration, we follow this idea into the 1970s when English language authors transformed a brief scientific paper into a sweeping argument that the moon might be a constructed object placed in orbit long before recorded history. Tap follow real quick wherever you're listening to stay connected and to help Renegade Files grow and thrive. Thanks. Part 3. The 1970s and 1980s expansion. In the mid-1970s, several alternative press speculative books explored the artificial moon hypothesis. This was the start of the idea moving into a wider popular consciousness. In 1975, Don Wilson published Our Mysterious Spaceship Moon. 4 years later, he followed up with his book Secrets of Our Spaceship Moon. Wilson drew heavily from the Vasson and Sherbakoff article and from much of the publicly accessible NASA mission information. Wilson compiled density measurements, orbital peculiarities, crater depth anomalies, and seismic interpretations into a single narrative that pointed toward the moon as an artificial satellite. He argued that the moon's size relative to Earth, its stabilizing effect on the axial tilt, and its precision placement were too coincidental and beneficial to be mere accidents. He also dove deep into the ringing like a bell phenomenon, focusing on NASA reports that described the prolonged vibration of the moon in technical terms. Wilson treated the duration of those vibrations as structural evidence, reasoning that if a bell rings, it must possess a cavity. That analogy became central in later theories. Wilson's books circulated widely within the alternative research communities. For many readers, this was the first time the artificial moon hypothesis appeared as a cohesive case based on compiled evidence rather than one or two passing references. 1 year after Wilson's first book, another one entered the conversation. George H. Leonard published Somebody Else is on the Moon. This was in 1976. Leonard approached the subject by focusing primarily on internal structure. He examined lunar images released by NASA and argued that certain formations resembled artificial constructs. Leonard claimed to identify towers, domes, and geometric alignments on the surface of the moon. He also suggested that some photographic frames revealed active presence, like dust trails behind or below vehicles. His book was one of the first to explore the ideas of not just construction in the distant past, but the possibility of ongoing habitation. This idea dramatically shifted the tone. And all of a sudden, people were asking if the moon was indeed engineered long ago, could there still be living activity upon it? And was that activity now being concealed in real time by the powers that be? Leonard's work introduced a new element into the growing narrative: suppression. If structures existed on the moon, and if imagery captured them, then someone must be preventing public disclosure. This hypothesis began to intersect with broader themes of secrecy that were already expanding during the 1970s. In 1981, Fred Steckling added further momentum with his book, We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon. Steckling built upon Leonard's photographic interpretations and extended them into more direct claims. He asserted that installations did indeed exist and that evidence had been intentionally withheld from public view. This is when we start to see the NASA cover-up narratives becoming more widespread and discussed. And remember that in the late 70s and early 80s, American political scandals and conspiracies like JFK, Watergate, and the Pentagon Papers were still fresh in people's minds. So it's within this cultural environment that claims of NASA withholding information about the moon find a very receptive public. At least a certain layer. NASA, for its part, has always put forth and maintained conventional geological explanations for some of the strange features of the moon, like the ringing phenomenon. The apparent objects and dust trails are always explained by impact craters, tectonic formations, and the always favorite pareidolia effect. Yet outside of the mainstream, alternative authors connected these dots differently. They argued that anomalies were not isolated curiosities, but components of a larger pattern. The moon's orbital characteristics, density profile, seismic behavior, and photographic irregularities were presented as cumulative. Like the late great David McGowan asked, how many coincidences does it take before you have a conspiracy? So we see this sort of evolution of the alternative viewpoints from hypothesis to accusation. The first discussions asked whether the moon might be hollow, and then if it could be artificial. Later work suggested that authorities already knew that it was not just both, but still inhabited, and that the man, like always, was covering it up. By the end of the 1980s, the spaceship moon idea had embedded itself within a wider constellation of theories involving extraterrestrial contact and classified space programs. The spaceship moon theory no longer stood alone. It became one piece in a broader paranormal, extraterrestrial, and fantastic landscape. The last thing I want to make sure we understand here is the impact of this 70s and 80s alternative book phase and what impact it had on the whole moon speculation camp, which is this. These books, articles, and authors not only expanded the contents and the scope of the claims, but they were also responsible for a dramatic expansion of the audience. Paperbacks and sci-fi magazines in bookstores, speculative pulp science mail-order media, and underground lecture circuits spread the word to a hungry public. The moon had evolved from ancient mythmaker to geopolitical destination target and into a constant character in the alternative research culture. In the next part, we will meet authors who integrated the ideas into even larger cosmological and historical reinterpretations, extending the implications far beyond geology and into the very nature of human origin. To dive even deeper into the world of Renegade Files, join the Renegade Files agency on Patreon and become an RFA agent today. Just do it. You can check out our Patreon page for free at patreon.com/renegadefiles, or just tap the link in the show notes to get bonus episodes and days of other cool content. Thank you if you're an RFA agent already. You make the show possible. Part 4. When things get weird, the weird go pro. By the 1990s, the artificial moon hypothesis had fused with the overall alternative research ecosystem. One of the most influential voices to integrate the spaceship moon concept into a larger framework was Jim Marrs. Marrs, widely known for his research into the JFK assassination, among other things, wrote a book called Alien Agenda that was published in 1987. In that book, he positioned the moon as part of a continuum of alleged extraterrestrial intervention in human affairs. Marrs wrote, quote, "There is mounting evidence that we are not alone, and that we have not been alone for a very long time." End quote. The moon, in his analysis, may be just one more artifact in a long historical pattern of extraterrestrial influence on Earth. In Alien Agenda, Marrs discussed both the Vasson and Sherbakov paper and referenced the Apollo seismic data. He treated the artificial satellite possibility as worthy of examination, and he did so in a way that was cumulative. He placed the moon anomalies as being as important as Roswell, the classified aerospace programs, or ancient astronaut theory itself. He suggested that, taken together, these things form a more coherent picture. Another conclusion Marrs makes in Alien Agenda is one of hope, or at least optimism, because his idea is that if an advanced civilization had been aware of and taken an interest in Earth since ancient times, then we can almost be certain that destroying or conquering us is not in their agenda, as Marrs puts it. Because if that was their goal, Why would they wait for us to develop advanced weapons and nuclear systems and higher technology? In other words, if conquest or destruction was their goal, they would have done so long ago. Mars viewed the information that the space agencies and military have on the moon as part of a larger cover-up of the knowledge of extraterrestrial presence among us, at least in our solar system. He wrote, quote, "When one sees the same pattern repeated over and over again, it ceases to be coincidence." For readers already inclined towards skepticism of official narratives, that statement carries weight. It also echoes the David McGowan quote I mentioned earlier, and I don't know which came first, but they both make the same point. So, Mars integrated the hypothesis of the moon as artificial craft or alien base into a larger narrative of hidden history. Then, in 2005, Christopher Knight and Alan Butler pushed the concept in a different direction with their book, Who Built the Moon? Knight and Butler approached the subject through geometry and symbolism. Their argument was not centered primarily on alien occupation, but on the numerical relationships between the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun. They pointed to ratios involving diameter, distance, and orbital mechanics that produce solar eclipses of remarkable precision. They suggested that these mathematical harmonics might indicate deliberate calibration. Their most provocative idea involved time travel. According to their thesis, a future iteration of humanity may have engineered or repositioned the moon in Earth's distant past to stabilize planetary conditions and ensure the survival of life. In this formulation, the moon became a safeguard, a stabilizing instrument placed into orbit to regulate axial tilt and climate cycles. It also becomes a magnet for asteroids that might otherwise strike the Earth constantly. The familiar alignment that allows the moon to appear almost exactly the same size as the sun during eclipses was interpreted as an intelligent design. Knight and Butler also engaged with ancient mythology, meteorology, and proposals that prehistoric measurement systems had encoded knowledge of these lunar ratios. They suggested that sacred geometry and megalithic architecture might preserve remnants of advanced understandings tied to the moon's placement. Here, the hypothesis left the realm of simple structural speculation and entered esoteric mathematics. The conversation expanded beyond hollow interiors and seismic data. It now encompassed symbolic codes, astronomical precisions, and temporal paradoxes. By the time we reach the late 2000s and the early 2010s, the moon theories undergo another radical transformation. So adjust your tinfoil hat and let's do this. Next up, David Icke. David Icke's cosmology extends far beyond the moon. In books like Human Race, Get Off Your Knees and The Biggest Secret, he describes reality itself as a manipulated construct. Within that system, the moon plays an active operational role. David Icke has stated, quote, "The moon is not a natural object. It is a hollowed-out planetoid or artificial satellite that acts as a control center." End quote. In his view, the moon transmits frequencies that shape human perception. According to Icke, a non-human bloodline, often described as reptilian, uses the moon as a broadcasting station. These entities allegedly manipulate consciousness through energetic signals that interact with human DNA and brain functions. In this model, the moon becomes less a relic of ancient engineering and more a functioning control device. Icke has also written, quote, "We are living in a vibrational prison and the moon is central to maintaining it." End quote. That statement captures the scale of his thesis. The moon is positioned as both a technological artifact and a psychological regulator that stretches fully into metaphysical territory. This merges the moon hypothesis with simulation theory, frequency-based reality models, and multi-dimensional cosmology, because in his system, the moon becomes a node within a larger energy network. For those who want to explore the reptilian dimension in greater detail, revisit Renegade Files episode 59, Lizard People, Our Reptilian Bloodline Overlords. That episode explores real human reptilian genetic lineage, as well as the symbolic relations and interpretations surrounding the so-called Lizard Kings. Check it out. Renegade Files episode 59, Lizard People, Our Reptilian Bloodline Overlords. So the idea that the moon could be an ancient alien artifact or a modern populated ET base has grown with each decade, absorbing new cultural currents and technological metaphors. As humanity entered the digital age and began speaking in terms of signals, frequencies, and simulations, the moon adapted within this new narrative. These developments can be seen as either creative modern mythology or intelligent guesswork applied to suppressed information, but the progression itself is undeniable. The artificial moon idea has expanded in scope with each generation that encounters it. In the final section of this exploration, we step back from the claims and consider their implications. If any version of this hypothesis were true, what would it mean for humanity, for history, for our identity, and for the future of our species? Part 5. What if the moon really is artificial? Up to this point, we have traced a progression. An ancient symbolic object becomes a scientific puzzle. That puzzle becomes a speculative paper. The paper becomes a body of alternative literature, which expands into geometry, time travel, reptilian bases, and frequency-based cosmology. Now we ask a question that sits beneath it all. If the moon were artificial, what would that actually mean? The first and most immediate question is, if this is the case, then who built it? The Soviet paper suggested an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Later writers proposed lost high technology from the Earth's distant past. Knight and Butler suggested a future humanity acting backward through time. And David Icke described non-human intelligences operating beyond conventional space-time. So, the Lizard People. Each version implies a level of engineering capacity far beyond current human capability. To hollow out or reposition a planetary body requires energy on a scale that dwarfs modern industry. It would require mastery over propulsion, structural integrity, and celestial mechanics. The next question then becomes timing. When would such a construction have taken place? Standard planetary formation models place the moon's origin about 4.5 billion years ago. Commonly attributed to a giant impact scenario, artificial moon theorists challenge or reinterpret that timeline. Some suggest pre-human intervention in deep antiquity. Others suggest deliberate placement during the emergence of complex life here on Earth. The advanced ancient civilization hypothesis. The time travel model proposes an event outside of linear chronology altogether. If the moon was engineered, then Earth's geological history would need reinterpretation. So would the development of tides, climate cycles, and biological evolution itself. Which leads us to the third question. Why do this for Earth? Of all possible planetary systems, why position an artificial satellite here? Maybe because the Earth is in what they call the Goldilocks zone, a distance from the sun that's warm enough for life, but not too hot and not too cold. a distance which fosters the stabilization of liquid water. That's a huge thing. How many other planets occupy that zone in relationship to their star in the universe? Well, according to some cosmology experts, billions. The evolution safeguard theory does offer one answer. The moon stabilizes Earth's axial tilt. So this could be an answer to the question of why do this for Earth? Because without that, planetary wobble would produce these extreme climate variations, and a stable tilt, it allows long-term environmental consistency, let's just say. If life were the objective, stabilizing these conditions is a rational first step. Knight and Butler argue that the moon also acts as a gravitational shield, drawing in or deflecting objects that might otherwise strike Earth more frequently. In this scenario, the satellite becomes also a protective instrument. Another theory suggests observational intent. An artificial moon could function as a platform. From that vantage point, Earth could be monitored continuously. Ancient astronaut narratives often incorporate this idea. The moon becomes a watchtower positioned at a fixed distance, maintaining visual and electromagnetic oversight. This aligns with my own theory of what I like to call terrarium Earth. You may recall that I've mentioned it before. Then there's the energy grid interpretation. Some writers propose that the moon interacts with the Earth's magnetic field and the ionosphere in ways not yet fully understood. In esoteric models, the moon participates in a planetary energy system. Ley lines, sacred sites, and geomagnetic currents are imagined as components of a larger circuit. In the frequency control suggestions of David Icke, that circuit becomes technological rather than symbolic. The moon transmits actual signals. Those signals influence consciousness. Human perception operates within a bandwidth shaped externally. In this view, the satellite functions as a regulator of reality itself. Hey, wait a minute. How would he know this? Plot twist. David Icke is a reptilian. Whether one accepts these propositions or rejects them, they reveal something about cultural psychology. Scientific discovery rarely exists in isolation. When new data emerges, especially from remote environments like deep space, it always invites interpretation. In eras of institutional distrust, interpretation tends to widen. The NASA seismic experiments, the orbital peculiarities, the eclipse precision, the photographic anomalies, all of these become raw material. Alternative culture never treats such material as a closed case. It treats it like open source code to be played with and analyzed. When official agencies release partial information, speculation fills the gaps. When scientific language remains technical and cautious, imagination steps in to translate it into a plausible narrative. The artificial moon hypothesis, therefore, operates on two levels. On one level, it's a claim about engineering. On another, it's a reflection of how modern culture assimilates authority and mystery. The moon is visible to everyone. It belongs to no single nation. It hangs above cities and deserts, oceans and forests, populated areas and unpopulated areas equally. If it were artificial, then humanity would be living beneath a structure built by intelligence not openly acknowledged. That possibility bothers people, but it also fascinates other people. What would it mean for religion, origin stories, physics, or sovereignty if the object that regulates our tides and anchors our calendars were an artificial construct? Then Earth itself would occupy a different category within the cosmos. And if it were not merely ancient, but still active, then the present moment would look different as well. So why does this idea persist with such endurance? My summary. The question that has followed us through this exploration is not only whether the moon could be artificial, but why that possibility refuses to disappear. Across literal centuries, humanity has revised its understanding of the environment repeatedly. The Earth was once the center of the cosmos, then it became one planet among many. The stars were once fixed points, then they became suns. The Milky Way was the universe, then it became one galaxy among billions. Each expansion reshapes our identity in the universe. The moon sits at the edge of that ongoing process. It's close enough to study in detail, yet distant enough to remain mysterious. It influences tides, stabilizes rotation, and defines eclipses with geometric precision. It is a constant presence that appears familiar, yet its terrain is wholly alien. That combination creates psychological tension. When data appears unusual, or when explanations feel incomplete to some observers, the human impulse is not silence, but reinterpretation. The artificial moon hypothesis persists because it occupies that interpretive space. It doesn't rely on a single anomaly or an event, but instead it combines all of them: density, orbit, seismic behavior, ratios, photographs, timing, and cultural distrust. Taken individually, each element has conventional explanations within established science, but taken together, they form a fully different picture. The persistence of the theory says something about modern institutional skepticism. The 20th century delivered remarkable achievements in physics, engineering, and science, but it also revealed secrecy, classified research, disinformation campaigns, and public discoveries of concealed operations. When that trust erodes, the questions always get bigger. The moon as an object in the sky remains constant, but the stories projected onto it evolve with culture and with our own evolution. There's also something uniquely potent about the moon as a symbol. Unlike distant galaxies, the moon is visible without instrumentation. Children can see it. Sailors navigate by it. Poets write about it. It bridges myth and reality. If hidden structures were on the moon and orbiting the Earth in almost plain sight, it would represent the ultimate inversion of expectation. Not a secret buried underground or concealed in classified archives, but something illuminated in the night sky every night, glowing. That concept resonates because it challenges perception itself. Yet even if every artificial hypothesis were eventually disproven beyond a doubt, the pattern of speculation would remain. It demonstrates the human tendency to question surface explanations, to revisit assumptions, and to imagine agency where mystery persists. Our constant redefining of the moon says more about our instincts to name and understand our world than it does about the moon itself. And the moon is such a mystery precisely because we can see it. We go out on a clear full moon night and drive beyond the fringes of the city lights into the darkness of the open, lost back road. Pull over. Get out and look up. On its bright surface, we can see shadows, seas, and faces. We can almost imagine ourselves upon it. The Native American Pawnee Nation of the Great Plains say that when the wolf howls, his spirit walks on the moon. The moon reflects sunlight and darkness, but it also reflects those of us who contemplate it. And as long as it rises above the horizon, that contemplation is likely to endure. thank you sincerely for investigating That's No Moon with me. Subscribe or follow the show now so together we can meet here next time and explore the deepest covert stories of UFOs, aliens, hauntings, cryptids, conspiracy theories, and unsolved mysteries. I am so glad to have you in the Renegade Files crew. Check out our merchandise store through the link in the show notes or at therenegadefiles.com. Grab a hat, grab a t-shirt, support the show, and represent the paranormal on the street. Thanks. You have listened to this episode up to this point. You appreciate the work I put into making these shows for you. So right now is the best time to tap the Patreon link in the show notes. Do that and come check out everything I've made for you there. And I'll see you inside. Until our next adventure, I'm your host, Lex Gordon. Stay wild, Quantum Child.